I really want to start my remarks just by quickly echoing what so many have already said this morning, and that is I'm thinking about Barry today. It's such an important part of USEA for so many years, an important part of all of us who worked in the energy sector in Washington, D.C. And so my thoughts are about him again today and thinking all he did to contribute to the work of the energy sector, and really appreciate that. And I thought for my comments today, I want to talk on a going forward basis about three issues that are really important priorities for us that we're going to focus on this year. But first, I thought it would make sense to talk a little about how to operate in today's political climate. It's volatile, it's highly charged. I think we all recognize that. We, like I think most every association who speaks today, is involved in engaging the firm Ballast Research that helps analyze reputation and effectiveness in the policy arena inside the Beltway. And I find it's interesting that if you look at the Ballast Research for everyone, the aggregate of all the interests they do this for, in an era where gridlock and lack of accomplishment has really characterized government for several years, this isn't new, this has been something that's going on for a while. The average score of everyone in aggregate for effectiveness and reputation has actually started to decline. And that's no surprise. When nothing's getting done, that brushes back on everyone. And it's really interesting to look at that in the context of where we are as America's electric cooperatives, because as we approach our advocacy, we have a particular advantage, and that's really our business structure. It's just who we are in terms of 900 non-for-profit cooperatives in 48 states. They're owned by the consumers they serve. And it gives us a capacity when we engage in the advocacy arena in Washington to be not of Washington. And the Ballast Research shows that we've been moving up during the last few years in terms of our reputation. I think it's because we're just different. And I'd like to say that was all planned, but I thought it really is also just part of who we are in our business structure. But it's something that is important to us, that we are not of Washington. We're not of the gridlocked partisan bickering. We really are about constructive, positive ideas to help the communities we serve. And that's been an approach that I think has really helped us in a lot of ways. And, you know, if I looking back at 2020 and I look at how co-ops engaged, I want to step away from the policy side for 1 second just to acknowledge that during the pandemic, I'm really proud of how those community-based, community-owned entities across the country have served those 42 million people so well in the pandemic. They kept the lights on, they kept rates low. We, of course, are non-for-profit entities. We don't have shareholders, and any excess revenues that we earn are returned back to the consumers who own the co-op. And a number of our co-ops across the country, when the pandemic hit, accelerated return of additional equity back to consumers to help them as they were having challenges paying their electric bills. And it really made a difference in so many communities. We also, in the rural parts of America, as everyone knows, broadband is a real challenge, and the pandemic really shined a brighter light on that. And quite candidly, federal policy at best has been a mixed bag over the last couple of decades, and I would argue it's been pretty much a failure in terms of serving rural America with broadband. And so our co-ops really stepped up in this moment as well and did emergency Wi-Fi locations for kids to do their schoolwork in those communities. And it's just been we all wish the pandemic didn't happen, but I'm really proud of the response of my membership. So proud, I wanted to brag about that a little bit during these remarks. But I guess I would like to now shift forward to talk about an agenda for 2021 and some specific items that we're looking to achieve in the policy arena. The first is an interesting one about how we have our financing. You know, a lot of electric co-ops receive their financing through the United States Department of Agriculture, through the entity called the Rural Utility Service. And for decades, this entity has had financing with prepayment penalties associated with it, so you can't refinance without paying a prepayment penalty. I remember when I got my first home mortgage, gosh, 30 years ago, and I had a prepayment penalty back then too, but we've moved on from that for most of America in terms of financing. And as a result, in these historically low interest rates, most businesses in America have had the ability to refinance and take advantage of lower cost of capital. Unfortunately, for America's electric cooperatives, to take advantage of these historically low interest rates, it's going to take an act of Congress. And so we have been talking about this with Congress, with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, and it's been a very receptive audience to the idea that we need to eliminate this prepayment penalty. We first raised the issue in calendar year 2020. We got bipartisan bills introduced in both the House and the Senate. We got 127 House members, 25 Senate members signing on that bill. We were hoping to get it attached to some year-end package, but the momentum continues, and it's a super high priority for us going forward in 2021. For the obvious reasons that a lower cost of capital allows us to keep our rates low, and all of that translates to the communities we serve, because again, we're non-for-profit. We don't have shareholders. Every decision that affects us, every decision we make, or every decision made by regulatory entities that affects us, it all affects the rates that we charge our consumers. And so if we can layer in a lower cost of capital for our members, that helps not just our members, it helps the communities we serve. And in the context of looking for economic recovery coming out of this pandemic, both in the short term and the long term, we think this is a home run, and it's an easy one. And so that's a big priority for us to be able to refinance our debt. Second issue I'd like to talk about is the issue of the use of the tax code to incentivize investments in different technologies. And this has been around for a long time. Tax credits have been associated with renewables for a long time, with other technologies. One challenge is that we don't have the ability to directly participate in them, nor do the municipal utilities, by the way. And I foresee a future where the tax code is going to continue to be utilized to encourage development of all kinds of technologies in our sector. Renewables, storage, carbon capture sequestration. Across the board, I think the tax code through tax credits is going to be utilized. And we think we think it's important that those of us in our circumstance have the ability to be part of the solution, if you will, in terms of deploying those technologies. And so we're looking for Congress, when they enact these tax incentives, to create an opportunity where we get tax parity, and we're able to do that as well. Again, we've had conversations with a number of people on Capitol Hill on both sides of the aisle. And again, this issue is one that's well understood. It's complicated, but it's well understood. And this is going to be a big priority for us for the foreseeable future till we get it done, because we think it's so important to our membership. Third issue, the word infrastructure has been used a lot over the last few years in the Washington area, and everyone thinks that we should do an infrastructure bill, and yet we haven't done one for a long time. But I think the opportunity still exists. The discussion is still taking place. There are still both Democrats and Republicans talking about wanting to do an infrastructure bill, and I think infrastructure is an important policy area to look in terms of economic recovery and investment in our country. So yeah, we're all for the traditional infrastructure investments in the transportation sector that make a lot of sense, but it's also important we look beyond that. And if we're looking at a transitioning electric grid, investment in that electric grid, I think, is really an important infrastructure priority. Investment in the grid in terms of resilience, which quite candidly, and if you look at 2020 and the extraordinary number of storms that hit, resilience is a big issue. And investment in the grid to accommodate the transitioning energy economy, I think that's going to be something that should be a high priority. In addition, we're going to need expanded funding, and I think this is an infrastructure investment in innovation and new technology. You've heard the previous speakers talk about this. If we're going to move forward, the plans that some entities have talked about for reaching zero carbon by a certain date, if you ask them how they're going to get there, they can talk about getting most of the way there. But unless there's some technology innovation, it's really hard to get all the way there. And so I think investment in innovation technology ought to be part of that discussion. And finally, and I know this is an energy event and it's outside the energy space, but broadband has got to be part of an infrastructure package. We stand ready to make sure rural America has access to the same broadband that everybody else has access to in this country. And I got to tell you, this latest auction with the FCC called the RDOF, the Remote Opportunities Fund, we're in the quiet period right now, so we can't talk about all the winning bids, but based on what's been published in the press, we have some real concerns about unproven technologies and being awarded bids, and also bids that don't have an economic foundation that's going to be viable. And we're looking forward to engaging with the FCC to make sure when they go through the next step in that auction process, which is going to be really digging into the technological and the economic models that based on those bids, we want to hold people accountable, because we're really nervous that if someone gives a bid for a census block in rural America, that locks out that census block from anyone else going in for several years. And we want to make sure it's real broadband for people in rural America. And so that's our big infrastructure, another one of our big infrastructure priorities. So kind of walk through the sort of three issues that I think we're going to really jump into in 2021. I just want to close with a reminder of, I've heard the term reliable, affordable from a lot of speakers today. And I'm glad I'm hearing it. I want to tell you what it means to us as American Electric Cooperatives. We serve 92% of the persistent poverty counties in America. So when we talk about affordability, we're talking about consumer-owned entities, and these consumers are in challenging economic circumstances. And so that affordability issue, I know it matters to everyone, but I want to tell you, it's a big deal for us. It's in our DNA, and it's something we think about every day. And reliability as well. Folks, it's not unique to our consumers across the country. When you flip the switch, you expect that light to go on. So I don't want the fact that we all keep saying this word to make it where we just kind of say it as a phrase and not really mean it. This drives everything we do at NRECA on behalf of our members. Every policy issue we look at is through the lens of what makes sense in terms of providing reliable and affordable electricity for our consumers, many of which are in vulnerable populations and deserve that extra consideration, in my opinion. So that's how we're going to look at this in these tough days ahead in terms of the pandemic and everything else. We think we've got some constructive, positive ideas about how to move forward in a constructive way. With that, I'm happy to close my prepared remarks and answer any questions that folks may have.
Jim, thanks for bringing the NRECA perspective to our meeting today. A couple of quick questions. We surprisingly haven't heard a lot about cybersecurity, so I'm going to throw the question your way. Your members are both large, in some cases very large, and then some smaller utilities that are operating but are connected to the grid, and thus provide a vector of attack that could jeopardize a large portion of the grid. How, as an association, are you working with your members to secure their cyber operations and make sure that they are doing what they need to protect the national grid?
Well, great question, first of all, because it's such a significant issue. As all the associations know, are involved in the various subsector coordinating councils. We, along with the investor-owned utilities and the municipals, participate with the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council, which is the entity that brings the industry together with their government partners. And I have to say that we're the only sector that actually has specific regulations about cybersecurity through NERC and FERC. And I think that's a good thing. And that applies to anyone who is connected to the bulk power system, no matter how big or small you are. So whether you're one of the largest investor-owned utilities or you're an electric co-op that's not very big, we all have to meet those standards, and we do. I'm not saying we should not be vigilant every day, and that the bad guys are always looking for another way to break into the system. But I have to tell you that our membership has been actively engaged, and it's been a really constructive relationship across the utility sector with the IOUs and the munis as well in that regard. And so we are making those investments. We are following the NERC and FERC approved regulations as best we can, and we're actively engaged in sharing communication with our partners on the government side of DOE and DHS. So it's a never-ending effort, though, is it? You know, you can't say, oh, we're done, we got this covered. This is something that requires continued vigilance for the rest of our lifetimes. It's for the foreseeable future, in my opinion. But I do believe that sometimes there is that concern that, you know, you're only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. And these smaller utilities, maybe they don't have the infrastructure, the ability to invest like the big guys. I can tell you that for any of our members who are connected to the bulk power system, and not all of our members are, you know, our real small distribution co-ops are not connected to the bulk system. For those who are connected to the bulk system, they made the appropriate investments for cybersecurity.
It's great to know, and it's great to know that NRECA has programs and works with its members to help them in the cases where there's some smaller utilities. We've talked about this before at other industry forums. So Jim, thank you for a really interesting perspective from NRECA. I wish we had more time. I've asked you some more about the infrastructure bill. We'll get to it at our next meeting.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.